Have you ever watched someone stand so tall in their power that they seemed untouchable, only to watch in one swift moment the ground beneath them collapse? Power, you see, is seductive. It doesn't just corrupt, it isolates. And when God decides that someone's time is over, it is not thunder we hear first, it is silence. A silence that speaks louder than their reign ever did. The illusion of untouchable power is one of the most dangerous lies a human being can ever embrace. It often begins innocently, with success, achievement, or the admiration of others. Over time, this recognition becomes intoxicating. The applause of people feels like confirmation of permanence, as if the throne on which one sits cannot be shaken. But what many fail to realize is that every throne, no matter how golden, no matter how high, is built on fragile ground. The illusion of power convinces us that we are the exception, that our influence will last forever, that we can shape the world without consequence. And yet, history, psychology, and divine truth all reveal the same reality: power is borrowed, never owned. When God entrusts someone with authority, it is meant to serve, not to dominate. But when authority turns into arrogance, the divine hand that lifted can also be the hand that removes. This is the part we often forget. Our positions, our roles, our influence are not self-created trophies. They are given, and they can be taken. The illusion tells us, you are untouchable, but God reminds us, you are accountable. The longer a person believes they are beyond accountability, the deeper they fall into the trap of pride. And pride always has a predictable ending: collapse. Psychologically, this illusion also disconnects people from reality. When you are in power, fewer people tell you the truth. Flattery replaces honesty. Fear replaces authenticity. And suddenly you are surrounded by echoes of your own voice, instead of voices that challenge you. You begin to believe your perspective is the only one that matters. This is why so many powerful figures are shocked when their downfall comes. They had silenced dissent, ignored warning signs, and wrapped themselves in the false security of influence. The illusion blinds, until the moment God pulls away the curtain. But the truth is not only about kings, presidents, or leaders. The illusion of untouchable power can creep into everyday life. A parent can believe they will always control their children. A successful professional can believe their job will never end. A relationship partner can believe the other will never walk away. In each of these situations, the same danger exists: mistaking temporary influence for permanent ownership. Nothing on this earth belongs fully to us, not people, not positions, not even power. Everything is entrusted, and everything is accountable to God. So why does God allow us to fall into this illusion in the first place? Perhaps because the experience of believing in our untouchability exposes the core of our humanity, the need for humility. Sometimes it takes being brought low to remember that power is not the point, purpose is. God does not measure us by how long we stay on the throne, but by how we serve while we are there. The illusion whispers, hold tighter. God commands, open your hands. When the illusion finally breaks, it feels shocking. The one who seemed untouchable is suddenly vulnerable. The one who ruled with certainty now trembles in doubt. And yet, this is often the most merciful act of all. For in the breaking of the illusion, there is the possibility of truth. God removes the false so he can reveal the real. He strips away arrogance to restore authenticity. The throne is shaken so the soul can awaken. The lesson for all of us is simple yet sobering. Never confuse borrowed influence with eternal ownership. Power is not a shield against accountability. It is an invitation to responsibility. When we embrace that truth, we break free from the illusion of untouchability, and we live with the awareness that the only true power is God's. Before the fall, there is always a silence. We imagine collapse as a thunderous moment, filled with chaos, noise, and dramatic endings. But in truth, God often begins his work of removal in quiet ways. The silence is not absence, it is preparation. It is the space between what appears unshakable and what is about to be dismantled. When a person is about to lose their position of power, there are often subtle signs. the withdrawal of trust, the loss of influence, the distancing of allies. These signs are not loud, they are whispers, and yet, they carry the weight of divine intention. That silence before the fall is a testing ground. It asks, will you notice the shift? Will you hear the absence of applause, the fading of admiration, the cooling of loyalty? Or will you dismiss it as irrelevant, believing yourself immune to consequence? Many people fail this test because silence feels less threatening than confrontation. When no one openly challenges us, we assume all is well. But silence is often more dangerous than noise. Noise you can confront. Silence leaves you blind. Psychologically, silence before the fall works as an unveiling of truth. Those who once surrounded the powerful begin to see through the cracks, but they no longer speak. Their silence is the unspoken judgment, the quiet rebellion. And spiritually, God allows this silence so that the one in power may have an opportunity to reflect. It is a window of grace, a chance to turn, to humble oneself, to listen to what is not being said out loud. Yet, if the person ignores this silence, it becomes the prelude to their undoing. In relationships, we often see this pattern. A partner withdraws, not with shouting, but with quiet detachment. A child distances, not with accusations, but with a silent wall. A community loses faith, not by revolt, but by absence. Silence is the language of disconnection. And when God is about to remove someone from a place of influence, silence begins to echo all around them. Conversations that once centered on their greatness now shift elsewhere. Rooms they once commanded now feel emptier. Their presence no longer carries the weight it used to. This is how God begins to pull away his covering, not with dramatic storms, but with the stillness of fading relevance. For those observing, the silence before the fall can be confusing. We wonder why nothing dramatic is happening, why the unjust still stand. But we forget that God's judgment is often not immediate. It moves quietly, patiently, strategically. Just as night falls gradually, power too is removed gradually before the final collapse. And when it finally does fall, it feels sudden to the world, but those who were listening to the silence will know it had been coming all along. This truth teaches us two important lessons. First, never ignore the silence. If you are in a place of power, and you notice the applause fading, the trust weakening, or God's presence feeling distant, do not brush it off. That silence may be your opportunity to humble yourself before collapse. Second, if you are the one waiting for justice, understand that God works in quiet ways. Just because you don't hear thunder doesn't mean the storm isn't forming. The silence is the sign that God is already at work. So the silence before the fall is not emptiness. It is divine preparation. It is God withdrawing his favor, dismantling human illusions piece by piece, so that when the collapse comes, it is complete and irreversible. To the arrogant, silence feels like safety. To the discerning, silence is the loudest warning of all. And when God allows that silence to stretch, it is because he is giving space for repentance before judgment. But if that space is ignored, the silence quickly turns into the shock of removal. When someone is stripped of power, it is tempting to see only judgment, as though God's act is purely punishment. But if we look deeper, we see that removal is often an act of protection. It protects those who have been wounded, silenced or crushed under the weight of arrogance and misuse of authority. It also protects the future, ensuring that the cycle of harm does not continue unchecked. And in a paradox that many overlook, it sometimes even protects the one who has fallen, because collapse is often the only road back to humility, truth, and redemption. Think of how a parent intervenes when a child clutches something dangerous. To the child, it feels unfair, something was taken away, but to the parent, it was an act of mercy, because holding on would have caused more harm. In the same way, God's removal of power is not simply to bring someone low, it is to prevent greater damage to themselves and others. What feels like a devastating loss may actually be the most compassionate intervention. For the people under oppressive power, removal becomes liberation. The atmosphere of fear begins to lift. The silence that once smothered their voices gives way to courage. The absence of the one who controlled them creates room for growth, healing, and possibility. This is why so many communities or families feel an almost sacred relief when a toxic influence is finally removed. It is not only justice, it is protection of their future, their dignity, and their hope. Psychologically, protection through removal is also vital for the fallen leader themselves. When someone is drunk on influence, they often cannot see the harm they are causing. They believe the applause, the praise, the illusion that they are untouchable. But once stripped of their position, they are forced to confront the reality of who they are, without the titles, the recognition, the privileges. In that confrontation, there is an opportunity for transformation. God does not remove to leave a person empty forever. He removes so that emptiness can create space for reflection. He removes so that silence can open a path to humility. We must remember that unchecked power not only destroys those around it, it destroys the one holding it. A person consumed with control forgets compassion. They exchange intimacy for authority, and they lose sight of their own humanity. By stripping them of power, God protects them from total ruin. He interrupts their trajectory before it is too late. What looks like defeat is often the only doorway to salvation. For those watching, this perspective matters deeply. When you see someone fall, do not only celebrate their downfall. Ask yourself what God might be protecting through it. Perhaps He is protecting children who will now grow up free from cycles of abuse. Perhaps He is protecting a community that can now flourish under healthier leadership. Perhaps He is protecting the fallen person themselves, giving them a chance to rediscover humility before destruction consumes them completely. So the removal of power is not just a strike of judgment, it is a shield of protection. God removes not because He is cruel, but because He is merciful. What He dismantles is what we could not survive if it had continued. What He takes away may feel like an ending, but it is often the beginning of safety, restoration, and renewal. We may not understand it in the moment, but when we look back, we often realize it was the only way forward. When power is gone, the mask falls, and this is where the truth of identity is revealed. For as long as influence, authority, or control is in our hands, it becomes easy to confuse who we are with what we hold. Titles, recognition, wealth, or leadership often become extensions of the self. People begin to introduce themselves by what they do, rather than who they are. But when all of that is stripped away, the question that remains is far more confronting. Who are you without your crown? Who are you without control? This is the space where God does His deepest work, because in the vacuum of control, the authentic self is uncovered. The loss of power is disorienting, because it removes the scaffolding we lean on for validation. When someone falls from influence, they are often left in shock, not just because of the fall itself, but because they no longer recognize themselves. The applause is gone, the loyalty is gone, the certainty of position is gone, and what remains is silence. In that silence, they are faced with the person they truly are, stripped of adornments. And while this is painful, it is also necessary. True identity is never found in power, but in purpose. Psychologically, human beings crave control because it gives us a sense of safety. But control is also a mask. It hides insecurity, it covers fear, it disguises emptiness. Power allows a person to project strength, even when they feel weak. But once God removes that power, the facade collapses. Suddenly the leader who seemed confident is confronted with their inner vulnerability. The individual who seemed untouchable must face the reality of their flaws. It is in this moment that the deepest questions of life emerge. Not what have I achieved, but what am I without my achievements? Not who follows me, but who am I when no one applauds? This is where identity and faith intersect, because God's way of revealing who we are is often through subtraction, not addition. He takes away so we can see more clearly. When Job lost everything, his friends saw tragedy, but God saw transformation. When Nebuchadnezzar lost his throne and wandered like a beast, it was humiliation, but also restoration. Stripping away power forces us to confront not the image we project, but the essence we carry. And in that confrontation, many discover the truest version of themselves. For those who have lost control in relationships, careers, or positions of influence, this season of vacuum is not an ending, it is an unveiling. God asks, do you know who you are, apart from the applause? Can you stand in your worth when no one is watching? The beauty of this question is that the answer does not need to be rooted in position, but in being. We are not defined by crowns, but by character, not by what we hold, but by what we become when everything is taken away. It is also in this vacuum that humility is born. A person who has been stripped of power has the opportunity to see others more clearly. No longer insulated by authority, they are confronted with the humanity of those they once overlooked. This is why so many who fall from power later speak with a softer voice, a deeper empathy, and a renewed perspective. The vacuum of control allows the heart to expand in ways it never could, while clinging to authority. So when God removes power, it is not only an act of judgment or protection, it is an invitation to rediscover identity. It is an awakening to the truth that our value is not in what we rule, but in who we are, when stripped bare. And in that moment of emptiness, God whispers the most important truth: you are not your crown, you are mine. The shocking truth is that when God removes, He does not remove to destroy, but to renew. To the human eye, the loss of power looks final. It feels like a death, an irreversible ending. Crowns are toppled, influence is gone, and the mighty are brought low. But God's perspective is different. He sees beyond the collapse into what can be rebuilt. He understands that sometimes the only way to create new life is to clear the ground of what no longer serves its purpose. What appears as ruin is often the foundation for renewal. This principle runs through every story of redemption. When Joseph was thrown into a pit, and later into prison, it looked like destruction. Yet it was the pathway to his ultimate role in saving nations. When Saul fell from his throne, it was not just about his end, it was also about the rise of David. What God removes, He replaces with something aligned with His greater plan. Renewal always hides behind removal, but it takes faith to see it. For the one who has fallen, renewal may not come immediately. There is often a wilderness season between loss and restoration. This wilderness is where God reshapes character, refines motives, and strips away the arrogance that once blinded. It is a painful place, but also a fertile one. The wilderness breaks pride, but births wisdom. It silences noise, but amplifies God's voice. It is in this in-between space that renewal quietly begins to grow. Psychologically, renewal after loss is a process of identity reconstruction. A person who was once defined by their title, wealth, or influence must now rebuild their sense of self on a deeper foundation. Renewal means asking not, "What do I have?" but "Who am I becoming?" In this process, what is genuine begins to surface. Compassion replaces arrogance, humility replaces pride, and authenticity replaces performance. The stripping away of false power makes space for the emergence of true strength. For the people affected, renewal also unfolds in profound ways. When oppressive leadership or toxic authority is removed, those who were under its shadow find room to breathe again. Families can rebuild, communities can flourish, and individuals can grow in freedom. The renewal is not just for the one who fell, it is for everyone who lived under the weight of their dominance. God's renewal is communal. It restores not just individuals, but entire systems and generations. It is also important to see renewal as a divine reset. What God allows to be removed, He often intends to replace with something more aligned with His vision. When a door closes, it is not abandonment, but redirection. When a throne is emptied, it is not waste but preparation for new leadership. What looks like subtraction is actually multiplication in disguise. God never ends a story at destruction. He ends it at resurrection. This truth offers hope. If you have witnessed someone fall, do not assume the story is over. If you yourself have been stripped of something precious, do not believe it is the end. God's pattern is always to bring beauty out of ashes, life out of death, and new beginnings out of painful endings. His removal is strategic. It clears the way for renewal, for restoration, for resurrection. So when God removes, it is not the closing of a book, but the turning of a page. It is not destruction for the sake of cruelty, but destruction for the sake of creation. The shocking reality is that his removals are always invitations, invitations to see differently, to grow deeper, to begin again. And in that beginning, we discover that what God gives after removal is always greater, purer, and more enduring than what he took away.